Warsaw, Poland, December 1932. A cramped office in the Polish Cipher Bureau, lit only by a desk lamp, cutting through the winter darkness. Marian Rejewski sits hunched over sheets of paper covered in mathematical symbols, his fingers stained with ink, his eyes bloodshot from weeks of relentless calculation. Outside, the temperature has dropped below freezing. Inside, his colleagues have long since gone home. But Rejewski cannot leave. Not yet. Not when he is this close. The numbers dance before him, permutations, cycles, transformations. Somewhere in this mathematical maze lies the answer to what the Germans believe is impossible, the breaking of their Enigma cipher machine. His pencil moves across the paper, one equation, then another, and then, suddenly, he sees it. The pattern emerges from the chaos like a signal through static. His hand trembles. After 10 weeks of pure mathematical reasoning, after countless dead ends and recalculations, the unbreakable code has just been broken. The year is 1932, and the world has no idea that a young Polish mathematician has just accomplished what will later be called one of the greatest intellectual achievements of the 20th century. The Germans do not know, the British do not know, the French do not know. In a small office in Warsaw, armed with nothing but paper, pencil, and the power of pure logic, Marian Rejewski has cracked the enigma. Before we go further, if you appreciate deep dives into the untold stories of World War II history, consider subscribing to this channel. We bring you the detailed, technical, human stories that change the course of history. Now let's step back and understand how we arrived at this moment. The Enigma machine did not begin as a military device. In 1918, as the First World War ground to its bloody conclusion, a German engineer named Arthur Scherbius filed a patent for an electromechanical cipher machine. His vision was commercial, a device to protect business communications in the modern age of telegraphy and radio. The machine was elegant in its complexity. It consisted of a keyboard, a set of rotating wheels called rotors, a plug board for additional scrambling, and a lamp board that would illuminate the encrypted letter. Each keystroke would advance the rotors one position, changing the electrical pathway and thus the substitution cipher. With 3 rotors selected from a set of 5, 10 pairs of letters swapped on the plug board, and the rotors themselves capable of being positioned in thousands of different starting configurations, the number of possible settings exceeded 100 million. To put this in perspective, if you tested one setting per second, it would take longer than the age of the universe to try them all. Scherbius marketed his invention to banks and corporations, but they saw no need for such expensive security. The German military, however, understood immediately. By the late 1920s, the Reichswehr had adopted Enigma as its primary cipher system. The German Navy followed. Then the Luftwaffe. By the time Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, Enigma had become the backbone of German military communications. Every order, every battle plan, every strategic directive was encrypted through this machine. The Germans had absolute confidence in its security. Their cryptographers had calculated the astronomical number of possible settings. They had analyzed the mathematical principles. Their conclusion was unequivocal. Enigma was unbreakable. They were wrong. But they were wrong for an interesting reason. They had underestimated the Poles. Poland in the 1920s occupied one of the most precarious positions in Europe. Reborn as an independent nation after 123 years of partition between Russia, Prussia, and Austria, Poland found itself squeezed between 2 hostile powers, Soviet Russia to the east and a resentful Germany to the west. The Polish-Soviet War of 1919 to 1920 had taught Polish military intelligence a crucial lesson. In modern warfare, signals intelligence could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. During that conflict, Polish cryptanalysts had successfully broken Soviet codes, providing advance warning of Red Army movements. That success created a culture of respect for code breaking within the Polish military establishment. In 1926, Polish customs officials intercepted a suspicious package at the Warsaw train station. The package, addressed to the German embassy, had been mislabeled and accidentally forwarded to Polish authorities. Inside was an Enigma cipher machine. The Germans immediately demanded its return, citing diplomatic protocols. The Poles complied, but not before photographing every component, every wire, every rotor. The problem was that possessing the machine's physical design did not reveal how it was used. Without knowing the daily settings, which rotors were installed in what order, with what starting positions, and how the plug board was configured, the machine remained useless for decryption. The Poles needed to break the system itself, not just understand the hardware. The Polish General Staff's Cipher Bureau, known by its Polish acronym Bureau Cyfrow, faced this challenge head-on. The Bureau was led by Major Guido Langer, a career military intelligence officer who understood that the old methods of cryptanalysis would not suffice against Enigma. Traditional code breaking relied on linguistic patterns, letter frequency analysis, common word identification, grammatical structures. Against Enigma, these methods were nearly useless. The machine changed its substitution cipher with every keystroke. The letter E might be encrypted as Q in one position and as M in the next. There were no repeated patterns to exploit, no frequency distributions to analyze. What was needed was not a linguist, but a mathematician. In 1929, the Cipher Bureau approached Professor Zdzisław Krygowski at Poznan University. Krygowski was a product of the legendary Lwów School of Mathematics, one of the most prestigious mathematical institutions in Europe. The Lwów School had produced world-class mathematicians who specialized in set theory, topology, and functional analysis, abstract fields requiring exceptional logical reasoning. Krygowski agreed to organize a secret cryptology course for the university's most talented mathematics students. The students were not told the course's true purpose. They were simply informed that they would be studying data protection methods, and that discretion was essential. 20 students attended the initial lectures. Most could not handle the intensity and dropped out. By the end of the course, only 3 remained: Marian Rejewski, Henryk Zygalski, and Jerzy Ruzicki. All 3 were in their early 20s. All 3 had demonstrated exceptional mathematical ability. All 3 spoke fluent German, a requirement for understanding intercepted messages, and all 3 were about to change history. Marian Rejewski was the first to be recruited full-time by the Cipher Bureau in 1932. He was 27 years old, slight of build, with wire-rimmed glasses and an unassuming demeanor that concealed a formidable intellect. Rejewski had studied mathematics at Poznan University and then at the University of Göttingen in Germany, one of the world's mathematical epicenters. He understood group theory, permutation mathematics, and abstract algebra at a level far beyond what was typically required for cryptanalysis. This would prove decisive. When Rejewski was assigned to the Enigma problem, he was given 3 critical pieces of information. First, he had the photographs of the commercial Enigma machine from the 1926 intercept. Second, he had months of intercepted German military messages, encrypted text that appeared to be nothing more than random gibberish. Third, and this was the game changer, he received intelligence provided by French military intelligence, courtesy of a German traitor named Hans Thilo Schmidt. Schmidt, who worked in the German cipher office, had provided the French with documents describing the daily key settings for Enigma during certain months in 1931. The French cryptanalysts, using traditional linguistic methods, had been unable to exploit this information. They passed it along to the Poles, perhaps hoping their allies would have better luck. Rejewski looked at the problem differently than anyone before him. He did not think about letters. He did not think about language. He thought about mathematical transformations. Each Enigma encryption, he realized, was a permutation, a mathematical rearrangement of the alphabet. The machine took the 26 letters and scrambled them according to a specific mathematical function determined by the rotor positions and plugboard settings. If he could express this scrambling as a permutation and analyze its mathematical properties, he might be able to work backward from the encrypted messages to the machine's internal wiring. The Germans had made one critical operational mistake. To ensure that the receiving operator could decrypt a message, the sending operator needed to communicate the starting position of the rotors, the message key. But this message key itself needed to be encrypted, or else an enemy could simply read it and decrypt the entire message. The German procedure was to set the rotors to a starting position, specified in the daily key sheet, the ground setting, and then encrypt the message key twice. Twice because transmission errors were common in Morse code, and repeating the three-letter message key ensured accuracy. So if the message key was WXY, the operator would encrypt WXYXY using the ground setting, producing something like PFLGK, which would be transmitted at the beginning of the message. The operator would then reset the rotors to WXY and encrypt the actual message. This repetition, this seemingly innocent precaution, was the crack in the armor. Rejewski realized that the first encrypted letter and the fourth encrypted letter were both encryptions of the same original letter, just 3 rotor positions apart. The same was true for the second and fifth letters and the third and sixth letters. This created a mathematical relationship he could exploit. He could construct permutations based on these relationships and analyze their cycle structures. In permutation theory, every permutation can be decomposed into cycles. For example, if a permutation sends A to D, D to M, and M back to A, that forms a 3-cycle ADM. The cycle structure of a permutation, the lengths of its component cycles, is an invariant property that does not change even when the permutation is conjugated by another permutation. This was the key insight. The plugboard, which swapped pairs of letters, was mathematically equivalent to conjugating the rotor permutation. But conjugation does not change cycle structure. Therefore, Rejewski could determine the cycle structure of the rotor permutation without knowing the plugboard settings. He worked through the mathematics methodically. Using the intercepted messages, he cataloged the relationships between the first and fourth positions, the second and fifth positions, the third and sixth positions. He compiled these relationships into permutations and analyzed their cycle structures. He compared these cycle structures to theoretical calculations based on different possible internal wirings of the Enigma rotors. The calculations were immense. Pages and pages of algebraic manipulations, permutation compositions, cycle decompositions. He worked alone, often late into the night, filling notebook after notebook with equations. And then, in December 1932, he found it. The cycle structure matched. From pure mathematical reasoning, without ever having access to a military Enigma machine, without ever knowing the daily keys, Rejewski had determined the exact internal wiring of the Enigma rotors. He had reverse-engineered the machine. The Unbreakable cipher had been broken in 10 weeks, but breaking the cipher in principle was different from reading messages in practice. Rejewski had discovered the rotor wirings, but he still needed to determine the daily key settings for each new day. This required a systematic method for testing possibilities and narrowing down the correct rotor order, rotor starting positions, and plugboard connections. Rejewski, now joined by his fellow mathematicians Henryk Zygalski and Jerzy Rojewski, set about developing practical techniques. Jerzy Rojewski was the youngest of the three, only 19 when he first attended Krygowski's cryptology course. He had a gift for mechanical thinking, for visualizing how abstract mathematical concepts could be implemented in physical devices. Rojewski developed what became known as the clock method, a technique for determining the rotor order by analyzing the patterns in the encrypted message keys. He also contributed to the design of mechanical aids that would speed up the decryption process. Henryk Zygalski brought methodical precision to the team. He was thorough, patient, and extraordinarily careful, qualities essential when working with cryptographic systems where a single error could invalidate hours of work. Zygalski developed a catalog system using perforated sheets, large sheets of paper with holes punched in specific positions corresponding to possible rotor settings. By overlaying multiple sheets and looking for positions where holes aligned, the cryptanalysts could dramatically narrow down the search space for the daily keys. These Zygalski sheets became one of the most effective tools for Enigma decryption. The team also commissioned the construction of replica Enigma machines, built in secret by a Polish factory. These replicas, incorporating the rotor wirings that Rejewski had determined, allowed the cryptanalysts to test potential daily keys quickly, but even with replica machines, testing all possibilities remained prohibitively time-consuming. They needed automation. In 1938, Rejewski designed an electromechanical device that became known as the bomba kryptologiczna, the cryptologic bomb, named after the ticking sound it made while operating, which reminded the cryptanalysts of a bomb. The bomba was not a computer in the modern sense, but it was a sophisticated automatic calculator designed for a specific purpose, testing rotor positions at high speed. Each bomba consisted of 6 replica Enigma machines wired together, allowing parallel testing of different settings. The device exploited the mathematical relationships Rejewski had discovered, automatically rejecting inconsistent settings and stopping when it found a match. With 6 bombas running simultaneously, one for each possible rotor order, the Poles could determine the daily key in approximately 2 hours. By 1938, the Polish Cipher Bureau was reading German Enigma traffic routinely. They knew the German order of battle. They understood German military doctrine. They tracked Luftwaffe deployments and Wehrmacht maneuvers. As tensions rose across Europe, as Hitler annexed Austria and dismembered Czechoslovakia, the Poles possessed something precious, insight into German intentions. They knew war was coming. The question was, when? In December 1938, the Germans increased Enigma's security. They added 2 additional rotors to the set, increasing the number from 3 to 5. This meant that instead of 6 possible rotor orders, the number of ways to select and arrange 3 rotors from a set of 3, there were now 60 possible rotor orders, the number of ways to select and arrange 3 rotors from a set of 5. The Polish bombas, designed for 6 rotor orders, would now require 60 machines to maintain the same coverage. Poland did not have the resources to build 54 additional bombas. The cryptanalysts could still break the code using manual methods, but the process became slower and more labor-intensive. Then came the summer of 1939. By July, it was clear that German invasion of Poland was imminent. The Polish government faced a decision: keep their Enigma breakthrough secret, hoping to maintain their advantage, or share it with their Western allies, knowing that Britain and France had greater resources to exploit the intelligence. Major Langer, the head of the Cipher Bureau, made the decision to share everything. On July 25, 1939, representatives from British and French intelligence arrived at a secret location in the Piri Forest, south of Warsaw. They were led by Commander Alistair Denniston, the head of the British Government Code and Cipher School, and Dilly Knox, Britain's leading cryptanalyst. The Poles escorted them into a secure facility and showed them something they had not expected: a working replica of the German military Enigma machine. Denniston was stunned. The British had been working on Enigma for years, relying primarily on linguistic cryptanalysis, and had made virtually no progress. Knox, a brilliant classical scholar who had broken codes during the First World War, had developed some theoretical insights into Enigma, but had never been able to reconstruct the rotor wirings. Rejewski, speaking quietly and methodically, explained the mathematical principles behind his breakthrough. He described permutation theory, cycle decomposition, the exploitation of the repeated message key, the reverse engineering of the rotor wirings. He demonstrated the Zygalski sheets and explained how they narrowed the search space. He showed them the BOMAS and described how they automated the key-finding process. The British visitors listened in growing astonishment. This was not incremental progress. This was a complete solution, a fully operational cryptanalytic system that had been reading German military traffic for 7 years. The Poles provided the British and French with everything: complete documentation of the rotor wirings, replica Enigma machines, sets of Zygalski sheets, detailed descriptions of the bomba design, and full explanations of the mathematical methods. It was an act of extraordinary generosity and strategic foresight. The Poles knew that their country would soon be fighting for survival. They knew that their cryptanalytic facilities might be destroyed. They knew that only Britain and France had the industrial capacity and scientific resources to continue the work on the scale necessary to keep pace with German improvements to Enigma. By sharing their methods, they were ensuring that the knowledge would survive even if Poland fell. 5 weeks later, on September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. The Wehrmacht attacked from the west. 17 days later, the Soviet Union invaded from the east, honoring the secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Poland was crushed between two totalitarian powers. The Polish Cipher Bureau evacuated Warsaw, moving first to eastern Poland and then, as Soviet forces advanced, fleeing south toward Romania. Rejewski, Zygalski, and Rejewski escaped with their colleagues, carrying what documents they could. They made their way through Romania, Yugoslavia, and Italy, eventually reaching France, where they continued their cryptanalytic work alongside French intelligence. When France fell to the Germans in June 1940, the Polish cryptanalysts again had to flee. Rejewski and Zygalski reached Britain, where they joined the Polish forces in exile and continued to work on Enigma at the British Code-Breaking Center at Bletchley Park. Rejewski's route was more complicated. He remained in Vichy, France, working undercover before finally escaping to Britain in 1943. Tragically, Jerzy Rejewski did not survive the war. In January 1942, he was aboard a ship that struck a mine in the Mediterranean and sank. He was 35 years old. Meanwhile, at Bletchley Park in England, British cryptanalysts were building on the Polish foundation. Alan Turing, a brilliant young mathematician from Cambridge, had been recruited to work on Enigma shortly before the war began. When the Polish methods were shared with the British in July 1939, Turing immediately grasped their significance. He understood the permutation mathematics that Rejewski had used. He recognized the power of the bomba concept, but he also saw that the German modifications to Enigma, the increased number of rotors, changes to the indicating procedure that eliminated the repeated message key, required a new approach. Turing designed an improved version of the Polish bomba, which the British also called a bomb, using the French spelling. The British bomb was larger and more complex than its Polish predecessor, incorporating electromagnetic relays and capable of testing thousands of rotor positions per minute. But the fundamental principle remained the same: exploit mathematical relationships to narrow down the vast number of possible keys to a manageable set that could be tested. The first British bomb became operational in March 1940. By the end of the war, over 200 bombs were in operation, working around the clock to break daily Enigma keys for different German military networks. The intelligence derived from Enigma decrypts was codenamed Ultra by the British. Ultra intelligence provided the Allies with unprecedented insight into German military planning. During the Battle of the Atlantic, Ultra intercepts revealed U-boat positions, allowing convoys to be rerouted away from wolf packs and enabling hunter-killer groups to locate and destroy submarines. In North Africa, Ultra gave British commanders advanced knowledge of German supply shipments, troop movements, and offensive plans, contributing to Montgomery's victory at El Alamein. During the D-Day invasion, Ultra confirmed that the Germans had been deceived by Allied deception operations and believed the main invasion would come at Calais rather than Normandy. Throughout the war, Ultra intelligence shaped Allied strategy at the highest levels. The official British History of Intelligence in World War II, written by historian F.H. Hinsley, estimated that Ultra shortened the war in Europe by at least 2 years and possibly as many as 4. 2 years, a conservative estimate, meant millions of lives saved, both military and civilian. It meant liberation coming sooner for those under Nazi occupation. It meant less time for the Holocaust to continue its mechanized mass murder. The breaking of Enigma was not merely an intellectual achievement, it was a humanitarian contribution of incalculable magnitude. Yet, for decades after the war, the Polish contribution remained largely unknown. The British government maintained strict secrecy about Ultra until 1974, when the first official histories were published. Even then, the focus was overwhelmingly on Bletchley Park and British codebreakers. Alan Turing received deserved recognition as a pioneering computer scientist and cryptanalyst. The work of Dilly Knox, Gordon Welchman, and other British cryptanalysts was documented. But Rejewski, Zygalski, and Rojitki remained obscure figures, known primarily to historians specializing in Polish military history. Part of this obscurity was intentional. After the war, Poland fell under Soviet domination, and the communist government classified all information about the pre-war Cipher Bureau. Rejewski himself returned to Poland after the war, but was forbidden from discussing his cryptanalytic work. He worked as an accountant, living in modest circumstances, his wartime achievements unknown to his neighbors and colleagues. Only in the 1970s, after the British broke the official secrecy around Ultra, did Polish authorities allow Rejewski to describe his work. He published technical papers explaining the mathematical methods he had used to break Enigma. He gave interviews to historians. He corresponded with British and American cryptologic researchers, patiently correcting the historical record. Marian Rejewski passed away in 1980 at the age of 74, having finally received some recognition for his achievements. In 2000, 20 years after his death, he was posthumously inducted into the Military Intelligence Hall of Fame at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. In Poland, schools and streets bear his name. A statue stands in Bydgoszcz, his birthplace. But his fame still does not approach that of Alan Turing, despite the fact that Rejewski's breakthrough preceded and enabled Turing's work. The Enigma story illuminates a fundamental truth about cryptography and the nature of intellectual combat. The Germans designed a machine they believed was mathematically unbreakable. They were correct that the number of possible settings was astronomically large. They were correct that traditional cryptanalytic methods based on linguistic patterns would fail. But they failed to account for the power of pure mathematical reasoning applied by exceptional minds. They failed to anticipate that someone would think about their cipher not as a linguistic puzzle, but as a mathematical object, a permutation group, amenable to algebraic analysis. The Germans also made operational mistakes that, while seemingly minor, proved catastrophic. The decision to repeat the message key, a security procedure intended to prevent transmission errors, created the mathematical vulnerability that Rejewski exploited. Had the Germans not repeated the message key, Rejewski's cycle structure analysis would not have worked. The entire breakthrough hinged on that one procedural decision. This illustrates a cryptographic principle. It is not enough for a cipher to be mathematically strong. It must also be used correctly. Human factors, operational procedures, user behavior, organizational decisions are often the weakest links in cryptographic systems. There is also a geopolitical dimension to the Enigma story that deserves reflection. Poland, a country that had been erased from the map for over a century, a nation fighting for its very survival between hostile powers, possessed neither the industrial might of Britain nor the vast resources of the United States. Yet it was Poland that first broke the unbreakable code. The Poles succeeded because they recognized what was needed, not linguists, but mathematicians, and they recruited the right people. They succeeded because their mathematicians approached the problem without preconceptions, willing to apply abstract mathematical theories to practical problems. They succeeded because they were willing to share their discoveries with their allies, even knowing that history might not give them credit. The Polish cryptanalysts were not motivated by fame or recognition. They were motivated by survival. They knew that intelligence could mean the difference between their nation's existence and its destruction. They worked in secrecy, under pressure, knowing that failure meant their country would be blind to German intentions. When they succeeded, they did not boast. When they were forced to flee their homeland, they continued working in exile. When their contribution was forgotten by history, they did not complain. They had done their duty. Today, cryptography is everywhere. Every time you make an online purchase, send an encrypted message, or authenticate your identity digitally, you are relying on mathematical principles not fundamentally different from those that Rejewski applied to Enigma. Modern cryptography uses more sophisticated mathematics, elliptic curves, number theory, computational complexity, but the core idea remains the same. Create a mathematical transformation that is easy to perform in one direction, but extremely difficult to reverse without the key. The story of Enigma reminds us that extremely difficult is not the same as impossible. It reminds us that human ingenuity, armed with mathematical reasoning, can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The breaking of Enigma was a team effort spanning nations and years, involving thousands of people from cryptanalysts to machine operators to intelligence officers. But it began with 3 young Polish mathematicians in a small office in Warsaw, armed with nothing but pencils, paper, and pure logic. Marian Rejewski saw a mathematical pattern, where others saw only chaos. Henryk Zygalski brought methodical precision to transform theory into practice. Jerzy Ruzicki contributed mechanical ingenuity to automate the impossible. Together, they proved that the unbreakable could be broken, that the impossible was merely difficult, and that mathematical reasoning could alter the course of history. Their legacy extends beyond World War II, beyond cryptography, beyond mathematics itself. Their legacy is a testament to the power of the human mind, to the value of education, to the importance of intellectual preparation. The Polish Cipher Bureau did not wait for war to begin before recruiting mathematicians. It prepared in advance, recognizing that future conflicts would be won not only with tanks and aircraft, but with equations and logic. That preparation, that foresight, that investment in intellectual capacity paid dividends far exceeding its cost. In a world increasingly shaped by information, by computation, by mathematical algorithms that govern everything from financial markets to social media feeds to military systems, the Enigma story is more relevant than ever. It reminds us that security is not guaranteed by complexity alone. It reminds us that determined adversaries with sufficient intellect and resources can break systems that seem impregnable. It reminds us that the next breakthrough might come not from the largest nation or the richest corporation, but from a small team of brilliant individuals approaching a problem from a new angle. The Enigma machine, once the symbol of unbreakable security, now sits in museums, a relic of a different era. The mathematical principles that Rejewski used to defeat it remain fundamental to cryptography. The lessons of how it was broken, operational security matters, human factors matter, mathematical analysis can defeat seemingly unbeatable systems, continue to shape cryptographic practice today. And the story of the 3 Polish mathematicians who first broke it stands as one of the great intellectual achievements of the 20th century. A reminder that pure logic, applied with brilliance and persistence, can indeed find the answer.